Sorry about the mishap. We continue here. It is innately deemed necessary that a dedicated neural scheme that delivers these survival-based emotions, percept and appropriate responses do not atrophy and would therefore not activate when they should be alerting us to something that we really need to be fearful of and to avoid, and not generate a sense of anxiety to inform us that we need to be developing an appropriate, well-planned avoidance strategy, or more beneficially, altering whatever we are doing. So this atrophying of the nociception system and the fear response, it's something acute and real. And what Ken Ware is pointing to here, that's a modern habit of not acknowledging fear responses, not acting on them, and in the end the effect will be that it stopped to work. It will not give the effects that it's supposed to do. We will not get the emotions that will guide us and give energy for our actions. And in the end, we will make a divide and say that emotions are those nasty things that is not part of my system. And I'd say that is pretty close to what we were saying yesterday, actually, when we said intention was something above ourselves, not an intricate connected part of our whole system, but intention, that is thinking and then acting, should be separated from the rest of the bodily system. Here we see rather that emotion is actually part of everything. It's not separatably possible to get rid of it. But when we hide it, it comes up in another way. All of a sudden, what happens is we will get fear responses on almost everything. And even if I haven't heard this reasoning before, it rings a bell, because phobias are becoming incredibly common today. And I'm surprised they're popping up almost to the same extent. New allergies are popping up. Weird allergies are comparable to weird phobias. I heard somebody the other day who was actually afraid of indoor plants. Yeah, I'm not joking. He said, he was on the Swedish radio, and he said before, please don't joke. So, and he was caused, I think his mother put him in front of the telly when it was a horror movie, and it was this famous science fiction Return of the Triads or Tripods or something. I remember seeing it.
Not Return of the Plants?
Yeah, it was something similar. Yeah, it was that. It was plants who attack people. And if you're a bit younger, that could happen. But it's so common these days with phobias. And he's dead on the point here, Ken Ware, actually. And this is a very, very, very similar to a thermostat. So, and here we have the PNS. It provides negative feedback to the system to enable it to maintain itself in idea allostasis, equilibrium sort of. This is similar to the thermostat on your cooktop at home. It's very good, the comparison. Once it's set to a certain temperature, if the system begins to exceed that temperature, the system receives negative feedback, that's the feedback loop, which bring the temperature back to the set temperature. So our emotional system is the same. It is to make our balance, not to set us off balance. But if we are beginning with this today, I would say, commonly acknowledged avoidance strategy, to avoid feelings because they shock us, they come unexpectedly, they can be overwhelming. But if we do that, there's a price to be paid. The system will go havoc and it won't work like a good thermostat anymore. And your cooktop will overcook or undercook. So you have to understand, I think this is, I'm constantly coming back to this. We are not separated from the environment. Although, for instance, Darwin wanted to separate the species from the environment and other species, whereas DNA fanatics like Dawkins want to separate the gene even from our cells and says that the selfish gene's doing his job, and he doesn't acknowledge any other part in the universe. It is the same with our emotional responses. They are there for a purpose. It doesn't we cannot be out without them, because then our system will go havoc in unexpected ways. It can lead to pains, but it can also lead to these phobias, nightmares, anxieties, and by then you start developing an avoidance strategy where you have to avoid things because they make you too scared or too anxious. And when you start avoiding things, that is going to make it exponentially worse. It's a little bit like the old saying I mentioned before, get up in the saddle. If not, your horse is going to turn to a big monster. I actually have a friend who suffered from this. And I remember that he had this sort of, looked like a pacemaker on his chest, and that checked his heart rate when he had his anxiety attacks. I have to say a Swedish word, herregud. That's an excellent feedback system. So he could look at the numbers and tell, I'm having an anxiety attack. Of course, that goes into the feedback system and makes it even worse. So he had to avoid more things, and especially in his case, when he didn't have a specific thing to avoid that just turned up, he had to avoid all stuff. I don't know if he suffers from this thing today, but I think I have a good reason to ask him if he does. It would be interesting. I come to know he's a professor in sociology these days, so maybe give him a bell and ask him if he still has them. If not, maybe we can be of some assistance. Not in this lecture, but can wear as an antidote to this. And this is, oddly enough, even if Ken Ware started out of helping himself and then other athletes, especially professionals, against lack of mobility, excessive pain syndromes, these turn out to be helpful also in cases where we have what they call more psychological tendencies. We usually say that fear is a psychological tendency. But if you look in the paper carefully, he doesn't really separate. He is a very practical man there, very Aussie. He actually reminds me in some instances, he doesn't care what people think in general or the dogma of the time. So he doesn't seem to make any difference between bodily perception or what we call psychological perceptions. And I think that is very sound, because those differences lead in themselves to the idea our emotions is not part of ourselves. You can even go so far that we start thinking in Cartesian terms, that I am a self and then I have emotions. I think Descartes himself, he had I am myself, and he investigated inside his brain there, and he said in the end, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I exist. But that took away everything that was Descartes. His body, his emotions, his actions, his thinking, everything almost. It's just become one line. And of course that's a tale from his own side. It's like he exists in some vacuum somewhere in Nowhereistan. Nowhereistan is next to Afghanistan. Nowhere. It doesn't make any sense. So both the sympathetic SNS and the parasympathetic nervous systems act out under instruction from the hypothalamus, which in turn is dictated by the limbic system. The limbic system includes our evolved prefrontal, orbital, frontal cortex of the neocortex. Post a perception of fear, anxiety or pain, it is primarily in the prefrontal cortex that an emotionally healthy person cognitively evaluates and rationalizes. Their sympathetic nervous systems generate responses to unexplained sensations of fear and anxiety, and executively chooses to gate them or dampen them. So we get this unwanted or uncalled for, I think that's better than uncalled for response, and it's completely dampened as long as the neocortex is in action. And this will then activate the parasympathetic nervous system to supply the negative feedback necessary to bring the system back into allostasis. Conversely, this is not the case with many clients who become instantly offended with any percepts of fear, anxiety, pain, sadness, etc. Instead of being able to cognitively gate or rationalize these non-source related innate experiences as insignificant, due to there being no apparent identifiable causes for their emergence, they overreact to them and maintain their attention to them. This provides their sympathetic nervous system with a positive feedback loop, which then continues to amplify their experiences. This is similar to holding a microphone in front of a speaker. And you'll know what happens then. You get a sound that is amplified and amplified and amplified. In the end you have this very annoying, but it's exactly the same process within the system. Just as you react positively, you get a positive feedback loop, and all of the end it's established a fear of something that doesn't really amount to proper fear. I think that's highly interesting. It reminds me slightly what I've seen from some Alexander thinkers. Ted Diamond takes this up as well, and it's escalating this system. Once it's established, it's going to escalate, and for every time you support this loop of avoidance or not doing the things that you usually do, or even doing things you never done, you will put in more and more energy into the feedback loop and make it stronger, more lively and more real. And I think that is quite interesting. And the same actually goes for pain, but that's going to be another chapter. Highly interesting, Ken Ware, from his perspective, and it adds something to this fantastic soup that we are creating. It's a bit like the nettle soup that Kalle made the other day. He put garlic in and it was very good. Well, I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon.